This is the story of a man who built an empire on fear, who trusted no one, who could read lies in a heartbeat across a boardroom table, yet completely missed the deception unfolding in his own home. And it took the innocent words of a 10-year-old child to shatter the illusion and bring his entire world crashing down around him. Soul never sleeps, and neither does power. The city glitters like a jewel box turned upside down, all those lights reflecting off glass towers that pierce the night sky, each one a monument to ambition, to ruthlessness, to the kind of success that requires getting your hands dirty. Kim Jae-hyun understood this better than most. At 38, he commanded respect with a single glance, fear with a single word. His name moved through certain circles like a blade through silk, smooth and deadly. The restaurants that never appeared on any map, the private clubs where politicians rubbed shoulders with criminals, the penthouse suites where deals worth billions were sealed with blood instead of signatures, these were his domains. He hadn't inherited this empire. He'd carved it from the bones of those who underestimated him, built it with strategic brilliance and a capacity for violence that he wore like a second skin. People called him the Ice King behind his back, never to his face. To his face, they called him Sir, or Boss, or sometimes nothing at all because they were too terrified to speak. Jae-hyun preferred it that way. Emotion was weakness. Sentiment was a liability. Love was a fantasy for people who could afford to be vulnerable. And yet, there was one crack in his armor, one person who could make the Ice King's expression soften, if only for a moment. Her name was Mina, and she was 10 years old, with her mother's warm brown eyes and her father's stubborn chin. She was the only legacy of a marriage that had ended badly, the only thing Jae-hyun had ever fought for that wasn't about power or money or control. When his ex-wife died 3 years ago in a car accident that was probably not an accident, Mina became his entire world. The only pure thing in his corrupted existence. But raising a daughter alone when you run a criminal empire? That's a problem money can't solve. Nannies came and went, terrified by the armed guards, the late-night meetings, the phone calls that ended with someone screaming. Mina needed stability, warmth, something approximating a normal life, and Jae-hyun had no idea how to provide it. He could negotiate with Yakuza bosses and corrupt senators, but he couldn't figure out why his daughter stopped smiling, why she flinched when he raised his voice, why she looked at him sometimes like he was a stranger. That's when Naomi entered their lives. She appeared on a Tuesday afternoon in late spring, sent by the most exclusive domestic agency in Seoul, the kind that specialized in placing staff with families who valued discretion above all else. Jae-hyun's assistant had arranged the interview without consulting him, which would normally result in that assistant looking for new employment, but Jae-hyun was desperate. He'd gone through 9 nannies in 2 years. Mina deserved better. Naomi walked into his office like she belonged there, which was the first surprise. Most people who entered Kim Jae-hyun's private study did so with visible nervousness, eyes darting to the exits, hands fidgeting with whatever they were holding. This woman moved with quiet confidence, her posture relaxed but not casual, her gaze direct but not challenging. She was tall, with rich dark skin that seemed to absorb the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and she wore her natural hair in a simple style that somehow looked elegant. Canadian, according to her file. 32 years old. Bachelor's degree in early childhood education, master's in child psychology. References from families in Toronto, London, Dubai, all impeccable, all verified. Mr. Kim, she said, extending her hand. Her voice carried the faintest accent, smooth and warm like aged whiskey. I'm Naomi Clark. Thank you for seeing me. He shook her hand briefly, studying her face for the telltale signs of fear or calculation. He found neither. Interesting. Your credentials are impressive, Miss Clark. But I should be clear about the nature of this position. My household is not conventional. The hours are irregular. The environment is not always appropriate for children, which is precisely why I need someone capable of creating appropriate spaces within it. Privacy is non-negotiable. Discretion is mandatory. Can you handle that? Something flickered in her eyes, amusement, maybe? Mr. Kim, I've worked for a Saudi prince whose idea of a Tuesday was flying his daughter to Paris for lunch, a hedge fund manager in London who conducted business from his panic room, and a tech billionaire in Dubai who believed his children were being targeted by corporate spies. I think I can handle irregular hours and the need for discretion. Despite himself, Jae-hyun felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Almost a smile. Dangerous. And you're comfortable working in South Korea? You speak Korean? Fluently, she replied in perfect, unaccented Korean. I spent 2 years teaching in Busan before I moved into private childcare. I understand the culture, I respect it, and I know how to navigate it. They talked for another 30 minutes. She asked intelligent questions about Mina's routine, her interests, her emotional state. She didn't ask about his work, didn't probe into areas that didn't concern her, and she didn't flinch when his phone buzzed with messages that made his jaw tighten. When the interview ended, Jae-hyun made a decision that would change everything, though he didn't know it yet. The position is yours if you want it. You can start Monday. Naomi's smile was genuine, reaching her eyes. I'd be honored. Thank you, Mr. Kim. When she left, Jae-hyun sat in silence for a long moment, watching the city pulse beyond his window. Something about her felt different, though he couldn't identify what. He made a mental note to have her background checked again, more thoroughly this time. In his world, trust was earned in blood, and he trusted no one. The first few weeks were a revelation. Mina, who had become quiet and withdrawn, started laughing again. Jae-hyun would come home from meetings where he'd ordered men tortured or killed, and he'd hear his daughter's delighted giggles echoing from the living room where Naomi was teaching her to paint, or cook, or speak French. The penthouse, which had always felt like a beautiful prison, started to feel like something else. Something warmer. Naomi moved through their lives like spring water through stone, gentle but persistent, reshaping everything without seeming to try. She established routines that gave Mina structure. She created boundaries that even Jae-hyun found himself respecting. She filled the space with music and laughter and the smell of home-cooked meals, things that had been absent since his ex-wife's death. And she never, ever asked about his business. That discretion was more valuable than she knew. The men who worked for Jae-hyun, the cold-eyed enforcers and ambitious lieutenants, they watched Naomi with suspicion at first, waiting for her to slip, to show curiosity, to become a liability. But she treated them with the same pleasant professionalism she showed everyone, never prying, never gossiping, simply doing her job with quiet competence. She's good with the little boss, Park Minute-jun observed one evening. He was Jae-hyun's second-in-command, a scarred veteran who'd been with him since the beginning. They were reviewing security footage in Jae-hyun's private office, though Minute-jun kept glancing toward the living room where Naomi was reading to Mina. The kid's different. Happier. Jae-hyun grunted, not looking up from the reports spread across his desk. That's what I'm paying her for. Right. Just paying her. Minute-jun's tone carried something that might have been amusement. That why you've been coming home earlier? Taking fewer evening meetings? I've worked for you 12 years, boss. I've never seen you rearrange your schedule for anyone. The accusation, because that's what it was, hung in the air between them. Jae-hyun's hand stilled on the paper he was holding. When he looked up, his expression was arctic. Careful, Minute-jun. Just an observation, boss. No disrespect intended. But Minute-jun was smiling slightly as he left, and Jae-hyun wanted to deny it, wanted to maintain that it was all for Mina, that his increased presence at home had nothing to do with the woman who'd somehow made his daughter bloom again. He would have been lying. The truth was more complicated, more dangerous. Naomi had gotten under his skin without him noticing. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, there was no lightning bolt moment of realization. It was cumulative, like water wearing down stone. The way she hummed while cooking dinner, swaying slightly to music only she could hear. The intelligence in her eyes when they discussed Mina's progress, the genuine care in her voice. The rare moments when she laughed at something, The sound rich and uninhibited and utterly unlike the calculated giggles of the women who usually orbited his world, hoping to catch his attention and his money. She was real in a way nothing else in his life was real, and that terrified him more than any rival gang or police investigation ever had. 3 months after she'd started, everything shifted. It was late, past midnight, and Jae-hyun had just returned from a meeting that had gone badly. Blood on his shirt, though not his own. Anger thrumming through his veins like electricity. He'd expected the penthouse to be dark, everyone asleep, but light spilled from the kitchen. He found Naomi there, sitting at the island counter with a cup of tea, reading a book. She looked up when he entered, and her eyes went immediately to the blood. "Are you hurt?" The question was direct, calm, no hysteria. "No." She nodded, setting her book aside. "There's a first aid kit in the bathroom off your bedroom. The shirt's probably ruined, but if you want to try saving it, cold water immediately, then hydrogen peroxide on the stain." A pause. "Would you like tea?" "I made chamomile." Jae-hyun stared at her, this woman who'd just given him stain removal advice while he stood in her kitchen covered in another man's blood, and something inside his chest cracked open. "You're not afraid?" It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Should I be?" "Of you?" She tilted her head, considering. "You're dangerous, Mr. Kim. I've known that since the day I interviewed. But you're not dangerous to me, and you're not dangerous to Mina. You're dangerous to people who threaten what you protect. That's different. Most people can't make that distinction. I'm not most people." She poured him tea without asking if he wanted it, sliding the cup across the marble counter. "Sit down before you fall down. You look exhausted." He should have refused. Should have maintained the distance, the hierarchy, the clear delineation between employer and employee. Instead, he Saturday. He drank the tea. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Jae-hyun talked. Not about business, not about the blood on his shirt, but about smaller things. Mina's upcoming school recital. The restaurant his mother used to take him to before she died. The way Seoul looked from his office at dawn, all soft and new before the day's corruption set in. Naomi listened, really listened, and when she spoke it was thoughtful, genuine, never trying to fix or judge or manipulate. Just present. Just there. When he finally went to bed, hours later, Jae-hyun lay awake staring at his ceiling and acknowledged what he'd been denying for weeks. He was falling for her. Falling for his daughter's nanny, for this woman who'd appeared in his life like something out of a story, too good to be true. Too good to be true. The thought should have triggered his instincts, should have made him suspicious, but he was too far gone already. He'd been seduced not by sexuality but by something far more insidious, the fantasy of normalcy, of coming home to warmth and laughter and someone who looked at him like he was a man instead of a monster. Over the following months, the lines blurred further. Naomi became essential, not just to Mina but to the entire household. She managed things Jae-hyun hadn't even realized needed managing, anticipated problems before they arose, created an oasis of calm in the center of his chaotic existence. His men started going to her with questions about scheduling, about the boss's preferences, treating her with a deference usually reserved for family. And the way Jae-hyun looked at her changed. He'd catch himself watching her play with Mina, or cook dinner, or simply exist in his space, and the want was like a physical ache. He kept it locked down, professional, because she worked for him and he wasn't the kind of man who abused his power that way. But she had to know. Had to see it in his eyes, feel it in the weighted silences between them. One evening, 6 months after she'd started, something broke. Mina was asleep. The penthouse was quiet except for the soft jazz playing from hidden speakers. Naomi was in the living room, curled up on the sofa with her book and a glass of wine. Jae-hyun had intended to go straight to his office, to bury himself in work like always, but he found himself drawn into her orbit instead. "Join me," she asked, gesturing to the wine bottle. Not an invitation from an employee to her boss. An invitation from a woman to a man. He poured himself a glass and sat, Not too close but not too far. They talked about nothing important, a movie she wanted to see, a restaurant Mina had mentioned, the weather turning colder. Small talk, the kind Jaehyun normally despised, but with Naomi it felt like intimacy. Then she said, "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "I might not answer." Her smile was slight, understanding. "Why did you choose this life? You're brilliant, educated, strategic. You could have been anything. Why this?" No one had ever asked him that before. His men didn't question, his enemies didn't care, and his family was long dead. Jaehyun took a long drink of wine, considering whether to answer truthfully or deflect. Because being legitimate requires playing by rules designed to keep people like me in our place. Being illegitimate means I make the rules. I protect what's mine, I build what I want, and I answer to no one. He looked at her directly. "Does that disappoint you?" "No." She held his gaze. "It makes me sad, though. That you had to make that choice. That the world didn't offer you better options." The empathy in her voice, the genuine sorrow for a younger version of him she'd never known, undid something in Jaehyun's chest. Before he could think better of it, before caution could reassert itself, he reached out and tucked a loose curl behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek. "Naomi." Her name in his mouth sounded like a confession. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes searching his face. "This is complicated. I know. I work for you. There's a power imbalance. I know. Mina has to come first. Always. I know." His thumb traced her jawline. "Tell me to stop." She didn't. Instead, she closed the distance between them and kissed him, and it was like falling off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating and utterly inevitable. Jaehyun had been with many women, but this was different. This mattered. When Naomi's hands fisted in his shirt, when she made a small sound against his mouth, he felt it in places that had nothing to do with physical desire and everything to do with the heart he'd thought he'd frozen years ago. They pulled apart eventually, breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. "We should talk about this," Naomi whispered. "Tomorrow," Jaehyun replied. "Tonight, just let me have this." Tomorrow came, and they did talk. Set boundaries, established that Mina's well-being was paramount, agreed to keep their relationship private until they were sure it was real and sustainable. It should have been messy, complicated by their circumstances, but somehow it worked. Naomi moved through their life with the same grace she brought to everything, balancing her roles seamlessly. For Jaehyun, it was like learning to breathe again. She challenged him in ways no one else dared, called him on his bullshit, made him laugh, made him want to be better. Not reformed, not legitimate, but better within the context of who he was. More present with Mina. More measured in his decisions. Less willing to solve problems with violence when strategy would work. His organization noticed. Some of his men approved, seeing their boss more focused, more balanced. Others whispered that the woman was making him soft, that affection was a weakness their enemies would exploit. Jaehyun didn't care. For the first time in his adult life, he was happy. Genuinely, completely happy. Mina noticed too. Her father smiled more, came home earlier, seemed lighter somehow. And Naomi, who'd been wonderful from the start, became even more so. The three of them fell into a rhythm that felt like family, like the kind of normal Jaehyun had thought was forever beyond his reach. At night, after Mina was asleep, Naomi would slip into Jaehyun's room and they would talk and touch and make love with an intensity that left them both shaken. She was passionate but also tender, fierce but also gentle, and she looked at him like he was worthy of love despite everything he'd done, everything he was. "I love you," he told her one night, the words ripped from somewhere deep and honest. He'd never said them to anyone except Mina. Never meant them the way he meant them now. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too. So much." She kissed him then, and Jaehyun thought, this is it. This is what I've been missing. This is what makes everything else worthwhile. He should have known better. Should have remembered that in his world, happiness was a luxury you paid for in blood. But let's pause there for just a moment, because you need to understand something. This isn't just a story about a man who fell in love. This is a story about trust, about the lies we tell ourselves, about the difference between what we want to believe and what's actually true. Jae-hyun built his empire on reading people, on seeing through deception, on never taking anything at face value. Yet with Naomi, he was blind. Willingly, desperately blind. Because sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones we're complicit in, the ones we need to be true so badly that we ignore every warning sign, every inconsistency, every moment when reality tries to break through the fantasy. A year passed. The happiest year of Jae-hyun's life, which should have been his first clue that something was wrong. In his experience, happiness didn't last. It was borrowed, temporary, always extracted at cost. But he was too immersed in the illusion to see the cracks forming. Naomi integrated completely into their lives. She accompanied them to family events, met his legitimate business associates, stood by his side at charity galas where criminals laundered their reputations through generous donations. She was perfect in every context, charming with his allies, appropriately distant with his enemies, maternal and warm with Mina. Too perfect, if he'd been paying attention. But Jae-hyun wasn't. He was too busy planning a future he'd never thought he'd have. He started making different kinds of investments, setting up legitimate businesses that could provide cover and eventually, maybe, a way out. Not immediately, not while he still had enemies and obligations, but someday. For Mina. For Naomi. For the family they were becoming. He even bought a ring. 3 carats, flawless diamond, platinum setting. He carried it in his pocket for 2 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. The right dinner, the right mood, the right words. He wanted it to be memorable, special, something Naomi would tell their grandchildren about. He never got the chance. It was a Saturday afternoon, early autumn. Jae-hyun had cleared his schedule, a rare luxury, planning to spend the day with Mina and Naomi. Maybe take them to that gallery Naomi had mentioned, then dinner at Mina's favorite restaurant. Simple. Normal. Everything he'd come to crave. He was in his study, finishing up some paperwork, when he heard raised voices from the living room. Not angry, exactly, but intense. Urgent. He started to stand, concerned, but then recognized the voices, Naomi and Mina, talking. He should have announced his presence. Should have made noise, let them know he was there. Instead, something made him pause, made him listen. But I don't understand, Mina was saying, her voice carrying that particular tone of childhood confusion. Why do you pretend? Jae-hyun's hand froze on the doorframe. Pretend what, sweetheart? Naomi's voice was gentle, patient, the way it always was with Mina. Pretend to love us. You pretend with Daddy, I can tell. Sometimes when he's not looking, your face changes. You look sad. Or angry. Or something else. Not happy like you show him. Silence. Long enough that Jae-hyun felt his heart start to hammer against his ribs. Then Naomi spoke, and her voice was different. Flatter. Colder. The warmth stripped away like a mask removed. You're very observant for a 10-year-old. That's going to serve you well in life, Mina. But you're also wrong. I don't pretend to love you. I love completely. You're innocent in all of this. All of what? What are you talking about? Nothing you need to worry about. But yes, you're right about your father. I pretend with him. I've been pretending from the moment I walked into this house. Every smile, every touch, every time I said I loved him, it was all performance. All lies. Jae-hyun felt the floor tilt beneath him. This wasn't real. Couldn't be real. He was mishearing, misunderstanding, having some kind of psychotic break because the alternative. But why? Mina's voice cracked. Why would you do that? Daddy loves you. He's happy. I've never seen him happy like this. Why would you lie? Another pause, and when Naomi spoke again, There was something in her voice Jaehyun had never heard before. Something hard and brittle and full of old pain. Because 12 years ago, your father ordered the death of my brother. Marcus Clark. He was 24 years old, a graduate student who'd gotten involved with the wrong people, owed the wrong debts. Your father's men grabbed him off a street in Toronto, brought him to a warehouse, and tortured him for 3 days before finally putting a bullet in his head. They dumped his body in Lake Ontario like he was garbage. The room spun. Marcus Clark. The name detonated in Jaehyun's memory like a grenade. A low-level thing, barely worth remembering. A Canadian who'd gotten in over his head with one of their gambling operations, tried to run instead of paying his debts. Jaehyun's lieutenant at the time, long since dead himself, had handled it. Messily. Excessively. Jaehyun had been angry about the sloppiness, the unnecessary attention it might draw, but he hadn't stopped it. Hadn't even really thought about it beyond the operational complications. He'd certainly never connected it to the woman currently standing in his living room, calmly explaining to his daughter how she'd spent the last year deceiving him. My brother was my best friend, Naomi continued, her voice eerily steady. He made stupid choices, yes, but he didn't deserve what happened to him. And the men who did it. They walked away. No consequences. No justice. Because your father is powerful and protected and untouchable, and people like my brother are disposable. So I made a choice. I studied your father, learned everything about him, positioned myself exactly where I needed to be. I became exactly what he needed, someone trustworthy, competent, caring. Someone he'd never suspect. Suspect of what? Mina whispered. Of gathering evidence. Of documenting his crimes. Of building a case that will finally bring him down. Naomi's voice softened slightly. I never meant for you to get hurt in this, Mina. I tried so hard to keep you separate, to make sure you knew you were loved genuinely. But you're right, I've been pretending with your father. Every moment. Every kiss. Every time he looked at me like I was his salvation, I was thinking about Marcus, about justice, about making him pay. Jaehyun stepped into the room then, unable to listen anymore. Both of them turned to look at him, Mina with wide, frightened eyes, Naomi with something that might have been resignation or relief or both. How long have you been standing there? Naomi asked, and her voice was back to its normal warmth, except now Jaehyun could hear the falseness in it, the performance of emotion where real emotion should be. Long enough. His own voice sounded distant, hollow. Marcus Clark. You're his sister. Half-sister. Same mother, different fathers. But yes. She stood up slowly, putting herself between him and Mina, which would have been touching if it wasn't predicated on the belief that he might hurt his own daughter. I assume you're going to kill me now. That's fine. I expected it. I have contingencies in place, everything I've gathered will be released if I disappear or die unexpectedly. Your entire organization will be exposed. But if you're going to do it away from Mina. She doesn't need to see that. The matter-of-fact way she discussed her own death, the calm acceptance in her voice, hit Jaehyun like a physical blow. She really believed he'd kill her. Believed he was exactly the monster she'd convinced herself he was. I'm not going to kill you, he said quietly. I'm not going to hurt you. Despite what you apparently think, I don't murder everyone who inconveniences me. No, you just torture them for 3 days first. The bitterness in her voice was the first real emotion he'd heard from her since this nightmare started. Jaehyun closed his eyes briefly, fighting for control. When he opened them, Mina was crying silently, tears streaming down her face, looking between the two adults in her life like they were strangers. Mina, go to your room, please, Jaehyun said. Daddy. Now. Please. She ran, and the sound of her bedroom door slamming echoed through the penthouse like a gunshot. Jaehyun and Naomi stood facing each other across the living room that had been filled with so much laughter, so much false happiness. He studied her face, looking for any trace of the woman he'd loved, but all he saw was a stranger wearing her features. Tell me all of it, he said. From the beginning. You owe me that much. She laughed, sharp and humorless. I don't owe you anything, Kim Jae-hyun. But fine. You want the story? I'll give you the story. And she did. Methodically, clinically, she laid out the entire plan. How she'd spent years preparing, getting the right credentials, the right references, some real, some manufactured. How she'd researched him exhaustively, learning his patterns, his preferences, his weaknesses. How she'd deliberately positioned herself with the agency that served his household, waiting for the inevitable turnover of his daughter's caretakers. I knew you'd eventually need someone, she said. Men like you always do. You're capable of running criminal empires but helpless when it comes to the actual human needs of the people in your care. So I made myself indispensable. I gave Mina what she needed, which wasn't difficult because I do genuinely care about her. And I gave you what you needed, the fantasy of redemption, of being loved despite your sins. You ate it up. You were so desperate for it that you never questioned, never investigated beyond the surface. Each word was a knife, precisely placed. Jae-hyun absorbed them without flinching, though internally he was hemorrhaging. The relationship. All of it. Lies. All of it, she confirmed. Every kiss, every touch, every time I let you inside my body, it made me sick, but I did it because it kept you convinced, kept you vulnerable. You wanted to believe in love so badly that you overlooked everything that should have made you suspicious. The fact that I appeared exactly when you needed me. The fact that I was too perfect, too understanding, too willing to accept your world without judgment. You, who trusts no one, trusted me completely because I gave you what you wanted most, acceptance. The cruelty in her honesty was breathtaking. Jae-hyun had been tortured before, knew what physical pain felt like, but this was different. This was surgical, targeted at parts of him he hadn't even realized were vulnerable until she started cutting into them. And the evidence you mentioned, he asked, his voice remarkably steady. Comprehensive. Financial records, communications, testimonies I've recorded from your men who think they're talking to a sympathetic ear, video and audio from devices I planted throughout this penthouse. Enough to put you away for multiple lifetimes, to dismantle your entire organization. It's all encrypted, backed up in multiple secure locations, with instructions to be released to law enforcement and media if anything happens to me. Then why haven't you used it already? Why wait? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. Because I wanted to be sure. Wanted the case to be airtight. And because. She stopped, looked away. Because of Mina. Once I release it, her life changes forever. Her father goes to prison. She becomes the daughter of a convicted criminal. Everything she knows, everyone she trusts, gone. I kept telling myself I was protecting her by waiting, making sure everything was perfect before I pulled the trigger, but truthfully, I was stalling. Because destroying you means hurting her, and I love that little girl. Just not me. Especially not you. The words were brutal in their honesty. Every time you touched me, I thought about Marcus. Every time you said you loved me, I thought about my mother burying her son. Every smile I gave you cost me a piece of myself. So no, I don't love you. I hate you. I've hated you from the moment I learned what you did to my brother. Jae-hyun nodded slowly, absorbing this. A year of his life, the happiest year he'd ever known, revealed as an elaborate revenge plot. The woman he'd planned to marry despised him, had despised him all along. His daughter's newfound happiness built on a foundation of lies. The family he'd imagined for them nothing but fantasy. Get out, he said quietly. Naomi blinked, apparently surprised. What? Get out. Pack your things and leave. Tonight. I'll have Park arrange transport wherever you want to go. The evidence you've gathered, I won't touch it or you. Consider it insurance. But you're done here. You're just letting me go. Just like that. What do you want me to do, Naomi? Beg you to stay? Explain that I'm not the man you think I am? Point out that the person who ordered your brother's death 12 years ago isn't who I am now? He laughed bitterly. You wouldn't believe me, and frankly, I'm too tired to try. You got what you wanted, you hurt me. Congratulations. Now get the hell out of my house before I change my mind about being civilized. She stared at him for a long moment, and he could have sworn he saw something like regret in her eyes, but he didn't trust his judgment anymore. Clearly, he'd been wrong about everything when it came to this woman. For what it's worth, she said quietly, there were moments when I almost forgot. When you were with Mina, when you laughed at something genuine, when you let your guard down, there were moments when I could see the man you might have been if circumstances had been different. And those moments made this harder than it should have been. Get out, Naomi. She left. Within 2 hours, she was gone, taking nothing but her personal belongings and leaving behind a hole in their lives that felt nuclear in scope. Jae-hyun found Mina curled up on her bed, still crying. He sat beside her, and she threw herself into his arms with a desperation that broke what was left of his heart. I'm sorry, Daddy. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to ruin everything. I just wanted to understand why she looked sad sometimes, and then she told me all those things, and I didn't know what to do. Sure, baby, it's not your fault. None of this is your fault. He held her tight, stroking her hair. You did nothing wrong. You're the only person in this situation who didn't lie, didn't deceive, didn't manipulate. You were honest and brave, and I'm proud of you. But you're sad. You loved her and now she's gone and it's because of what I said. No. He pulled back to look at her tear-stained face. Listen to me, Mina. What Naomi did, what she planned, that started long before she came here. Long before you were even born. This was always going to end this way. The only difference is that your honesty let it end now, before it could get worse. You protected us both, even though you didn't know you were doing it. Do you understand? She nodded, though she was still crying. Jae-hyun held her until she finally fell asleep, exhausted by emotion, and then he carried her to bed and tucked her in like he used to when she was small. Then he went to his study, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and stared at the Seoul skyline while his world collapsed in slow motion around him. The ring was still in his pocket. He took it out, looked at the way it caught the light, thought about all the futures it represented that would never happen. Then he dropped it in the trash and poured himself another drink. Park Minute-jun found him there hours later, still staring at nothing. I heard, Minute-jun said quietly. The men are asking what you want to do. Should we track her down? Make her disappear before she can release whatever she's gathered? No. Jae-hyun's voice was hoarse from the whiskey and the silent screaming he'd been doing internally. She goes free. Untouched. That's an order. Boss, she has evidence. She could destroy us. Then we'll deal with it if it happens. But I won't become the monster she thinks I am just to prove her right. Tell the men to stand down. Naomi Clark is off limits. Anyone who touches her answers to me. Minute-jun was quiet for a moment. You still love her. Even after everything. I love the woman I thought she was. That woman never existed. Jae-hyun finally looked at his second-in-command. Get our legal team together. Have them start preparing for the possibility that she releases her evidence. I want contingency plans, exit strategies, protection for Mina. If I'm going down, my daughter doesn't go with me. Understood, boss. After Minute-jun left, Jae-hyun sat in silence for a long time, thinking about choices and consequences, about the man he'd been 12 years ago and the man he was now. Marcus Clark. He barely remembered the order, remembered even less about the young man who'd died because of it. One of hundreds of decisions he'd made over the years, each one staining his soul a little darker. But Naomi remembered. Naomi had built her entire life around that one death, had sacrificed a year of her existence to avenge a brother she'd loved. And Jae-hyun couldn't even summon righteous indignation because in her position, with her loss, he'd have done exactly the same thing. Probably worse. He'd built an empire on violence and called it success. He'd ordered deaths and called it business. He'd convinced himself that loving his daughter erased the blood on his hands, that finding love with Naomi meant redemption was possible. But you don't get redeemed from the things he'd done. You just live with them. And sometimes, they come back in forms you never expected, wearing the faces of the people you've learned to love. The weeks that followed were brutal. Mina withdrew again, the light that Naomi had rekindled dimming back to embers. She didn't understand the full scope of what had happened, but she understood that the woman she'd loved had used them, had lied to them, and that pain was written all over her small face. Jae-hyun tried to be there for her, tried to fill the gap Naomi's departure had left, but he was barely holding himself together. He'd become dependent on Naomi's presence without realizing it, had structured his life around coming home to her, around stolen moments of intimacy and warmth. Without her, the penthouse felt like a tomb again, beautiful and cold and empty. His men noticed the change in him. The Ice King returned with a vengeance, colder and more ruthless than ever. Meetings that would have once ended in negotiation now ended in blood. Rivals who would have been given chances were eliminated without hesitation. He stopped taking risks, stopped showing any vulnerability, walled himself off behind layers of caution and cruelty. If he'd been dangerous before, he became lethal now. "You need to pull back, boss," Minute-jun said one evening, after Jae-hyun had ordered the execution of a lieutenant who'd skimmed from their operations. Normally, that would merit a beating, loss of position, maybe exile. Not death. The men are getting nervous. They're starting to wonder if anyone is safe. Then they should stop giving me reasons to doubt their loyalty, Jae-hyun replied coldly. It's not about loyalty. It's about the fact that you've changed. You're not thinking strategically anymore, you're just reacting. That's dangerous for all of us. Jae-hyun knew Minute-jun was right, but he couldn't seem to pull himself back from the edge. The betrayal had done something to him, broken something that he wasn't sure could be fixed. If Naomi, patient, kind, loving Naomi, could deceive him so completely, then trust was impossible. Safety was illusion. The only reliable things were power and fear. So he accumulated more power and inspired more fear, and told himself it was enough. 3 months passed. No evidence was released. No raids came. Naomi had disappeared into whatever life she'd had before she'd entered his, and Jae-hyun started to believe that maybe she'd decided that destroying him wasn't worth destroying Mina in the process. Then, on a cold December evening, his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Jae-hyun. Naomi's voice, and despite everything, his heart still stuttered at the sound of it. What do you want? To talk. In person. There's something you need to know. I think we've said everything that needs saying. Please. The word was quiet, almost desperate. One conversation. After that, I'll never contact you again if that's what you want. But this is important. It's about Mina. The mention of his daughter's name was calculated, manipulative, and completely effective. Where? She named a cafe, neutral ground, public enough to be safe. Jae-hyun agreed to meet her the next day, then spent the night wondering what fresh hell she was about to unleash on his life. The cafe was small, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood far from his usual territory. Naomi was already there when he arrived, sitting at a corner table with a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. She looked different, thinner, tired, like the last 3 months had been hard on her too. But still beautiful. Still the woman he'd loved, even though that woman had never really existed. Thank you for coming, she said as he sat down. You have 10 minutes. Talk. She nodded, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup like she was cold. I want to start by saying I'm sorry. What I did to you, to Mina, it was wrong. I told myself it was justified, that I was seeking justice for Marcus, but the truth is, I was just using righteousness to excuse cruelty. You're not the man who killed my brother. That man, whoever he was then, is gone. The person you are now, especially with Mina, you're different. Better. And I destroyed something real because I was too focused on something that happened over a decade ago. Jae-hyun felt anger spike through him. You think apologizing fixes this? Makes it better? No. I know it doesn't. There's nothing I can say that will undo the damage I've done. But I needed you to hear it anyway, because you deserve to know that you weren't wrong about everything. The feelings I developed for Mina, they were real. And toward the end, the feelings I was developing for you, she stopped, swallowed hard. I was starting to care about you despite everything I'd told myself. That's why I kept stalling on releasing the evidence. I told myself it was about protecting Mina, but truthfully, I was protecting you too. Because somewhere along the way, the lines got blurred and I stopped being able to tell where the performance ended and reality began. That's supposed to make me feel better. That you accidentally caught real feelings while deliberately destroying my life. No. I'm not telling you this to make you feel better. I'm telling you because you deserve the truth, the whole truth, not just the version I gave you before. She took a shaky breath. I've spent the last 3 months trying to figure out what to do with the evidence I gathered. Part of me still wants justice for Marcus. But a bigger part of me realizes that releasing it would hurt an innocent child more than it would hurt you, and that's not justice, that's just more cruelty perpetuating itself. So I'm not going to use it. I'm deleting everything, destroying the backups, letting it all go. Jae-hyun stared at her, trying to process this. Why are you telling me this? Because Mina asked me to. The world tilted again. What? She's been emailing me, Naomi said quietly. I know I shouldn't have responded, but I couldn't help it. She's been asking questions about why I left, whether I ever really cared about her, whether you're okay. And in her last email, she asked me to please talk to you, to try to fix things, because you're not happy anymore and she misses how you used to be when I was there. The idea of his daughter secretly emailing the woman who'd betrayed them, reaching out because she was worried about him, made Jae-hyun's throat tight. She shouldn't be talking to you. I know. And I've told her that. But she's persistent. A ghost of a smile crossed Naomi's face. She gets that from you. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Jae-hyun said, even if I believed you about the evidence, about your feelings changing, it doesn't matter. What we had was built on lies. There's no coming back from that. I know. So what do you want from me? Forgiveness? I can't give you that. Understanding? I understand revenge, probably better than most people, so that's not the issue. The issue is trust, and you shattered that beyond repair. I don't want anything from you, Naomi said. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, that Mina is safe from anything I might do, and that you should try to find your way back to the man you were before I left. The one who came home early, who laughed with his daughter, who believed happiness was possible. That man is better than the one I hear about now, the one who's making his enemies terrified and his allies nervous. You don't get to have opinions about who I am anymore. You're right. I don't. She stood up, leaving her untouched coffee on the table. Take care of yourself, Jae-hyun. Take care of Mina. And try to forgive yourself for whatever it is that makes you think you don't deserve to be happy. She left, and Jae-hyun sat there for a long time, watching people come and go from the cafe, living their normal lives, unaware that his entire existence had just been upended again. That night, he asked Mina about the emails. She burst into tears immediately. I'm sorry, Daddy. I know I shouldn't have, but I missed her and I was worried about you and I just wanted to understand why everything had to be ruined. He held her while she cried, and when she finally calmed down enough to talk, she said, Do you hate her? I don't know what I feel, Jae-hyun admitted. What she did was wrong. She hurt us both. But she also gave us something real, even if she didn't mean to. You were happy when she was here. I was happy. That counts for something, even if the foundation was flawed. Do you think she really loved us? Me and you? Jae-hyun thought about Naomi's face in the cafe, the exhaustion and regret written all over it. I think she loved you completely, from the start. And I think she ended up caring about me more than she wanted to or planned for. Whether that counts as love, I don't know. It's complicated. Love is always complicated, Mina said with the wisdom of someone far older than 10. That's what you told me when I asked about you and Mommy. He'd forgotten saying that, but she was right. Love was complicated, messy, often painful. It didn't follow rules or logic. It just existed, demanding recognition and care even when it was inconvenient or impossible. The question was, what did he do with that information? The answer came slowly, over months of thinking and therapy. Yes, therapy, because Mina needed it and Jaehyun realized he did too. They worked through the betrayal, the trust issues, the way lies could contaminate even genuine feelings. They talked about Marcus Clark, about justice and revenge, about the weight of decisions made years ago that continue to echo through the present. And gradually, carefully, Jaehyun started to become someone different. Not reformed, not legitimate, but more intentional. He started questioning whether every problem needed violence as a solution. He delegated more, trusted his people more, stopped treating every decision as life or death. He spent more time with Mina, really present instead of distracted by work. He became, slowly, the man Naomi had pretended he was. 6 months after their meeting at the cafe, he made a decision. He had his people track Naomi down, not to hurt her, but to talk to her. She was back in Toronto, working as a child psychologist, living a quiet life far from Seoul and the world of violence she'd infiltrated for revenge. He flew to see her. No guards, no threats, just a man going to see a woman who'd turned his life upside down. She looked shocked when she opened her apartment door and found him standing there. Jaehyun, what are you doing here? I wanted to talk. Really talk, without anger or bitterness or a 10-minute time limit. Can I come in? She hesitated, then stepped aside to let him enter. Her apartment was small, cozy, filled with books and plants and photographs, including one of her with a young man who had to be Marcus. They looked happy, carefree, unaware of the futures that awaited them. You kept your word, Jaehyun said, looking around. No evidence released. No police raids. No media exposure. I told you I would. People tell me things all the time. Doesn't make them true. He turned to face her. But you meant it. Why? Because revenge isn't justice, and I'm tired of carrying hate. It's been eating me alive for 12 years, and all it's done is make me into someone I don't like very much. Someone who could hurt people I genuinely cared about because I was so focused on old pain that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. The person you cared about being Mina. And you. She met his eyes. I know you don't believe me, and I don't blame you, but it's true. Somewhere in all the lies and manipulation, I fell for you. Real feelings, not performance. It terrified me because it meant I was betraying Marcus's memory, but it happened anyway. I want to believe you, Jaehyun said quietly. More than you know. But I don't know how. Then don't. You don't owe me belief or forgiveness or anything else. I made my choices. I live with the consequences. He studied her face, looking for deception and finding only exhaustion and sadness. What if I told you I'm trying to change? That I've spent the last 6 months becoming someone different, someone better? Would that matter to you? Of course it matters. But not because it changes what I did or makes any of this okay. It matters because you deserve to be happy, Jaehyun. You deserve a life that isn't just survival and power and fear. You deserve what you thought we had. Maybe, he said. Or maybe I deserve exactly what I got, a reminder that the past always catches up, that there are consequences for the things we do, even if we forget them. They talked for hours that night, really talked, stripping away the layers of deception and bitterness to find something resembling truth underneath. It didn't fix anything. Couldn't erase the betrayal or restore lost trust. But it was a start. Over the following year, they rebuilt. Slowly, carefully, with full knowledge of who they both were and what they'd done. Naomi visited Seoul occasionally, spending time with Mina under Jaehyun's watchful supervision. They communicated honestly about their feelings, their fears, their doubts. They went to therapy together, working through trauma and trust with professional help. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, fights, moments when the old wounds reopened and threatened to destroy everything again. But they kept trying, kept choosing each other despite the complications. And eventually, against all odds and logic, they found something real. Not the fantasy Naomi had created during her deception, and not the relationship Jaehyun had imagined when he was blinded by need. Something harder, more complex, built on truth instead of illusion. 2 years after the day Mina's words shattered his world, Jaehyun proposed to Naomi again. Different ring, different circumstances, different people doing the asking and answering. She said yes. They got married in a small ceremony with only Mina and a few trusted friends present. No grand celebration, no media attention, just 2 damaged people choosing to build a life together despite everything that should have kept them apart. It wasn't perfect. They still had issues to work through, old wounds that ached in the cold, moments of doubt and fear. Jaehyun was still involved in his organization, though he'd shifted toward more legitimate operations. Naomi still sometimes woke from nightmares about Marcus, about the choices she'd made in his name. But they had each other, and they had Mina, and they had the commitment to keep trying even when it was hard. Because that's what love actually looks like, not the fantasy, not the performance, but the messy, complicated, painful reality of 2 people choosing each other every single day despite all the reasons they shouldn't. And in the end, maybe that's the point of the story. Not that lies destroy everything, or that betrayal is unforgivable, or that the past always wins. But that sometimes, if you're willing to do the work, if you're willing to be honest about who you are and what you've done, you can build something real from the ruins of what was false. Jaehyun learned to trust again, though differently than before. Naomi learned that revenge doesn't heal wounds, it just creates new ones. And Mina learned that families are complicated, that love isn't simple, and that sometimes the truth is painful but necessary. They became a family. Imperfect, scarred, but real. And that was enough. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, the most powerful stories are always the ones that challenge us to think differently about love, trust, and what it means to truly know another person. So if you've stayed with us through this entire journey, through betrayal and revelation, through collapse and rebuilding, thank you. These stories matter because they remind us that people are complex, that redemption is possible, and that love, real love, requires more than just feeling. It requires choice, commitment, and the courage to be vulnerable even after you've been broken. If this story moved you, if it made you think or feel or question, we'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Share your thoughts on forgiveness, on trust, on whether some betrayals can ever really be overcome. Hit that like button if you want to see more stories that go deeper than surface romance, that explore the complicated reality of human connection. And subscribe, because we're building a community here of people who understand that the best love stories aren't the easy ones, they're the ones where people fight for each other, fail, and choose to keep fighting anyway. We'll see you in the next one.